When was the last time you heard a news report on a terrorist attack? Was it a month ago? Was it a week ago? I know that I personally will never forget the events that took place on September 11th, 2001. I was only 5 years old, but I still could recall the simplest of details, as I'm sure many other Americans could as well. Today I will discuss in detail the State of the Union address that President George W. Bush delivered directly after the attacks that evening. I will discuss how he included the rhetorical elements into his speech, such as occasion, audience, speaker, and speech. But first I'm going to talk about the historical context that took place that day. It was the president's responsibility to respond to the attacks with urgency. This is when he introduced the concept of the war on terror. Zelizer and Allen wrote a journal article entitled Journalism After September 11th, and they discuss in detail the approach that George W. Bush took in his speeches. They said that he used the balance between constitutional guarantees of civil liberty and the imperatives of national safety, along with the impact of trauma on civil society. The terrorist group that carried out these attacks that day were a group called Al-Qaeda, which were led by a person named Osama bin Laden. 19 people carried out these attacks, and 2 of the attacks went as planned, with 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center in New York. The buildings collapsed shortly after. Another plane flew into the Pentagon, and a third one flew into an open field in Pennsylvania. All this information can be found on history.com, which was published in 2010. 9/11 really did define President George W. Bush's presidency. He condemned these acts of violence and spoke to the country in a way in which made the people feel safe about everything. This was an unusual type of occasion to deliver a speech. I mean, everything was unexpected and unpredictable. Therefore, this speech wasn't planned, but it was delivered the same day of the attacks. A Penn State article in 2016 entitled An Analysis of President Bush's Post-9/11 Speech said his urgency was a huge part of his success in delivering his speech. Why? Well, he never left the people in the dark. He had a sense of urgency to make sure the people knew what was going on moving forward from the attacks. He also made sure that the people knew that the government was working tirelessly, which also made the people have a sense of security. During an occasion like this, the people really need a strong leader to guide them. Ida Mueller posted a text of the speech that President Bush delivered in 2001, and Bush urged America to be strong when he said, "Terrorist attacks can shake foundations of our biggest buildings, but they can't touch the foundations of America." Occasions like this aren't good, but Bush managed to provide the audience with a sense of comfort. Bush talked to the audience with empathy and optimism. He made it known that the victims could have been anyone that day. He said that in his speech, he said that the unlucky ones were in airplanes or in the offices, secretaries, businesswomen, and military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. He also talked to the people with inclusive words such as us and we, which made the people know that they were not going through this alone. He made the audience feel empowered when he said these acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. The audience felt secure and strong, and it made George W. Bush a credible speaker. President George W. Bush spoke with poise and confidence, which made us trust him as our leader. He established an ethos by mentioning gratitude towards the rescue volunteers, such as policemen, firemen, and all of the good Samaritans who risked their own lives that day to help others. He was profound but sensitive when he said, "None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world." President George W. Bush used nationalism in his speech as well. Mike Milford wrote a journal article in 2016 called National Identity Crisis and the Inaugural Genre, George W. Bush and 9/11. He writes how Bush incorporated nationalism into his speech to make the American people have a sense of pride as Americans and to want to fight for their freedom and for their country. George W. Bush was a successful speaker because he used language and words, which was a huge part of his success. President George W. Bush used effective language techniques, which made him emphasize his main points. He used, for example, the rule of threes in the opening of his speech when he said, "Our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack." Right away, the audience were drawn to the words of his speech because he emphasized his points with the rules of three. He also used alliteration when he had referred in his speech the mass murder, which also made the words flow more easily. Powerful statements and languages set the tone of President George W. Bush's speech. This was done intentionally in order to create a perception towards terrorism. Maggio wrote a journal article cited called Presidential Rhetoric of Terror, the Recreation of Reality immediately after 9/11. He said that Bush helped shape social reality concerning the tumultuous events. Bush's speeches immediately following the terrorist attacks of 9/11 reveals an astonishing example of shaping reality. Ultimately, President Bush really did use all the rhetorical elements in order to successfully convey his message through his speech. He met the requirements of talking about audience, occasion, speaker, and speech. Jane Hall wrote an article in the Harvard International Journal of Press and Politics in 2003 where she talked about how Bush's approval rating actually went up after 9/11. This is because people began to trust him as our leader as he guided us toward a better future. Bly, Coles, and Mindel wrote a book in 2004 called Charisma Under Crisis, Presidential Leadership, Rhetoric, and the Media Responses Before and After the September 11th Attacks. They also discuss how Bush's rhetorical language became more charismatic after 9/11 because more people were looking to him for guidance and trusted him as a strong leader. Unfortunately, terrorism is still on the rise. It is so important and critical that we educate the people on the events of 9/11, especially if they weren't there to see it themselves. I encourage everyone to live in a peaceful world, and I really hope that the world never stops fighting the war on terror, and I hope that the events of 9/11 are never forgotten. Thank you for your time.